Okay, so we are good to go. Okay, yeah, so this is just a preview of the agenda. The bolded parts are what I really wanted to focus on today. Just some housekeeping. So again, we're doing this virtual, but there's only a few of you, so feel free to be off of mute and chime in where you might want to, make some comments or ask some questions. If anything is particularly triggering for you, Karen and I are licensed counselors, so feel free to message us privately, or even at the end, you'll see my email and we can follow up with you. There will also be some resources at the end that you could use for yourself, for any of your students, or any of the people in your life that you think might benefit from some mental wellness resources. I think those are the highlights of this. So we're actually going to do this. And so what we're going to do is I'm going to put on some music for you. And this is a helpful tool that you can use with your clients or your students at the beginning of class, but it's really unguided. It's a 3-minute body scan. And so if you're familiar with doing any type of meditation or yoga, usually you start off by just closing your eyes and examining your body from tip top of your head all the way down to your toes. So working your way through that and just noticing where you're holding any stress or any tension, and then really just focus on releasing that tension, or like where you could, if you notice your legs are tight, so squeezing your legs and then releasing that so you can release the stress. And the challenge is, after you do that body scan, I want you to write down the top 3 things on your mind. So the top 3 things you notice. So whether it's you're hyper focused on some meeting that you had today or some task that you have to do after this, that's okay, write that down. Or you can set 3 new intentions. So let's say your mind is completely blank and you want to take some time just to think of 3 intentions you want to set. Like maybe you want to set the intention to start your day off with a 3-minute body scan from now on. Or maybe you want to set your intention to be, I'm going to put all the dishes in the sink in the dishwasher after this is done. Whatever you want, you have the freedom to set your intention as you wish. So I'm just going to put on my timer and put on some white noise. A little tip that I gave the first session is, if you do choose to do this with a class or your clients or a family, keep in mind that if you pick, like I used to go on YouTube and just pick up like a really naturey video, but somebody told me kindly afterwards that for some people that's too much stimuli. So like hearing water dripping or bird chirping can actually be more distracting than helpful. So I just started playing pure white noise, which is enough to get you to kind of block background noise out, but it's not as distracting. Um, so that's what I'm going to play for you guys now. I'm going to play a little bit of white noise. I'm going to let you guys do this for 3 minutes, and then we're going to come back. And if you're bold, you can share. Sorry, I got to add. If you're bold, you can share what you came up with, but you don't have to. Can you hear that, Karen? I can see your video. Just, you can nod. Can you hear it? Okay. Okay. Come on back. So, anybody feeling particularly motivated to share?
I can definitely share. I think that I'm not sure about everyone else, but I've had a really busy day. And this is my first chance to kind of slow down. And my brain was not having it. I was just thinking about all the things I needed to do. But it was nice to try to be mindful for 3 minutes and scan. Thank you for that.
That makes me so happy that you said that. Thank you for sharing, because that was my whole point in putting this in there, because I know anybody in the helping field, any woman, dare I say, we struggle with that. And I have a personal connection in teachers. My husband is a teacher and he works for Norfolk Public Schools, and I've seen him over the last couple weeks. So I know what it's like. So I'm glad that at least the attempt was helpful. Anybody else want to share? You guys had similar experiences?
No, I have a tendency, so whenever I'm quiet like that, and if I think of like a pressure or something like that, I have TMJ, so in my jaw, and I don't know, my mind just goes down like a rabbit hole of things that are like worrying me. So then I just start praying the whole time, and I just like, I forget to do the rest of the body scan, and I just pray.
That's okay too. I love that. So this is also a self-awareness challenge, because at the end, spoiler alert, we're going to talk more about you guys and some self-care and some tips in that regard. So that's good self-awareness, and that can be helpful when you start to think about what you need to do for self-care. So that's good.
Tanetta, it should be called a guilt-free personal challenge, because I think that sometimes, these are all high achievers, and so it's really easy to think that there's a right way to do it. But I think that just sometimes, even I know for myself, even just stopping and being quiet, even if it means I'm thinking about a lot of thoughts, it's almost like I'm letting my brain kind of like catch up to where I'm actually at today. And sometimes it just kind of, that's why often we do that at night, is we have those moments at night where we can't sleep because our brain is finally getting a chance. So I think that I just say that guilt-free, because regardless of how you responded, it just kind of made you more aware. You chose not to go, you were all here. You didn't decide to go do the dishes or go finish that project. You were here, and that's really the main goal.
Yep. So thanks. Alrighty, so we are going to keep pushing. So another little interactive activity I have put at the beginning, because I wasn't sure where the participants would be from today. So I wasn't sure on what confidence level you guys would have with some mental health facts. So this is just a little quiz we can do to see if you want to type in the chat, or if you want to speak out, unmute, you can. But I just want to know what you guys think. So number one says self-harm is a mental illness. So you can say that is fact, fiction, or you're not sure, is somewhere in between. So I think we only have one teacher, other two counselors. So counselors, you guys might know this already. But what do you guys think?
I mean, self-harm isn't in the DSM, so I mean, not as a diagnostic, criteria. So.
Yep. So that is fiction. Number two, self-harm can be a good thing. What you guys think?
The only time I can picture it being a good thing is if it's like you don't actually die, it's like a sign for crying out for help, that kind of thing, where they actually get help.
That's awesome. Yes. So I put this one up here intentionally, because the whole spirit of my presentation is to encourage everybody to kind of operate with the thought of positive reframe. So if you think about self-harm in a strengths-based way, self-harm can be a good thing, because yes, it can lead to getting help. it is, one way I like to think of it is, if somebody has the capacity to self-harm, that means they're trying to find a resolution, yes, an attempt at coping within themselves. So that means I now have an opportunity to teach them a healthier way of coping and dealing and navigating whatever they're going through. So it can be a good thing because it's messaging, it's a language in and of itself. So, and yes, it means they did not complete suicide. So in a lot of ways, it can be a good thing. It's never a healthy thing. So I always try and clarify that point when I'm talking to people who are not in the mental health field, that we never want to say, it's a healthy thing that we promote, but we understand that if it's strengths-based, it has its perks, you could say. So number 3, if you ask a young person about their suicidal thoughts or intentions, you will make their symptoms worse or encourage them to complete suicide. Yes, fiction. Yes, author. Yes, fiction. All the research, science, training says you want to be direct and intentional about those types of conversations. So for some people, the S word or suicide, so to speak, is very uncomfortable to say. But just like when you're teaching a young person about their body parts, and you want them to be as aware and have the proper language. So when you are talking about suicidal thoughts or intentions, you just want to be direct. So good. Number 4, toxic stress during key developmental periods can alter the size and or density of your brain. What do you guys think? Fact. Yep. Yes, that is a fact. So because I am recording this for anybody who wants to watch later, I'm just going to say a couple words about toxic stress. So stress hormones in general are positive. It's a healthy part of human functioning. You want that fight, flight, or freeze response to happen because it gets you to safety. But in a typical well-functioning individual, after about 5, 10, or 15 minutes, those stress hormones are flushed out of our system, our nervous system. For individuals who never have a chance or were never taught self-regulation, anytime those stress hormones stay present and active for over 20 minutes at a time, it can turn to what we call toxic stress. And then it can start to, kill brain cells that do not regenerate. And it's especially harmful during key developmental periods. So, if at a later point I have an opportunity to come back, we love to do the ACEs training, which is Adverse Childhood Experiences, and we go into a lot more detail about the brain, the science behind that, what the key developmental periods are, and all of that. So it's really great information. So, but just knowing that stress present for more than 20 minutes can be toxic, and it can definitely impact a youth, minor, adult, individual ability to function at the level we would expect them to. So, earlier we had an English teacher on, and if you expect somebody to be able to sit for 20, 30 minutes straight and read a passage or take a quiz or a test, and they struggle with that, and the power of reframing, it could be because this is hard, it could be because they're being defiant, or it could be that they come from a background where they've experienced a lot of stress, they didn't learn how to self-regulate, and now they actually have an inability to calm themselves and focus for extended periods of time. So number 5, psychiatrists generally know which medications to prescribe to treat specific symptoms. You guys think that's fact, fiction, or somewhere in between? Okay, someone says in between. You guys are experts already.
Absolutely.
Yes, it's absolutely in between. So generally speaking, psychiatrists are medical doctors, and they go to school for a long time, and they study so that they can know, how to help somebody with their presenting problems. But all of that's trial and error. So, we speak about, especially for students that have ADHD, and we encourage families to pursue medication, and they choose to actually have their children on medication. It's important that teachers and family members know that they might be prescribed Vyvanse, they might be prescribed Adderall, but the dosage matters, the way their body metabolizes medication matters. So all of that's trial and error, and it might be 6 or 7 months before we actually see that medication impact, how they're functioning, because the psychiatrists are, experimenting, so to speak, with the right dosage, the right time of day, the right type. So great. Let's keep pushing. So I'm not gonna, the next few slides are more content heavy, and it seems like you guys have a good basic understanding of a lot of this, but just for the sake of recording, I want to emphasize again, when you reframe things from what happened to you, or from what's wrong with you to what happened to you, you typically have a better chance of having a positive experience with somebody. So understanding that trauma is a risk factor in almost every type of mental illness, and understanding that adverse childhood experiences are common, they're frequent, but they're preventable. And that the more we can reduce those, the healthier and happier our students and families will be. So, yes. More on ACE is not going to read it to you guys, but the bolded point at the bottom is really important. So understanding that prevention can really reduce ACE scores and foster resilience. So later on, we'll talk about some quick ways we can foster resilience when we interact with youth and families, and even our colleagues, because children grow to become adults, hopefully, if as long as nothing tragic happens. But we all were children once. We all have our own traumas and stories. And so you might have a colleague that needs to heal from a childhood trauma, and they need to also learn how to be resilient and be in a status of recovery instead of, constantly being re-triggered. So good stuff. This is one of my favorite slides. It's just a visual representation that you guys as counselors could use, or even as a teacher could use when you're talking about some of these topics. So again, the way that people present does not become a problem until their behavior don't meet our own expectations. So a child or a student or even a parent that's more edgy or more hypervigilant or more likely to have a temper, that behavior does not become problematic until you take it out of their home setting and try and apply it into like a school setting, so to speak. Because outside of school, that's a survival technique. They've learned to thrive and survive in whatever setting they were conditioned in. So if you look at the bottom half, it talks about when your environment prepares you for a tough life or an evil world, you're going to be responding to stimuli in that way. So then, the third box just shows that you've adapted to survival in those types of conditions. And there could be careers that suit that. We talk about firefighting or military, or there's plenty of careers that could suit an individual condition for that type of life, just like the top realm. So when you're thinking about your students or the people in your life, understanding that everybody is conditioned for survival, and although their behavior might not be what you're expecting at that time, we don't have to shame them or make them feel guilty for it. Rather, we can help them understand that they can learn how to code switch, so to speak, and they can learn how to function at home, but also learn how to function in this school environment, and we can teach them new skills instead of correcting them, if that makes sense. So you guys already know this very generic definition of what a mental illness is. I italicized diagnosable because even as a counselor, I don't love that idea that in order to be mentally unwell, it has to be diagnosable, but it is important just for people that might want a textbook definition that's in there. What we really want to focus on are what's typical versus what's not typical, and how to really recognize and talk about warning signs. So that's really about examining the impact of their change. Is the person you're working with struggling in multiple settings, school, social, they're struggling with doing their daily activities, all that sort of thing. So this is just a little chart that I put in here for those that like a little bit more guidance. Maybe they learn better with examples. So at the end of this presentation, I'll be sending out a PDF. So if this is something you're going to share with somebody to help them become more informed, they will have access to this. Okay, so now we're getting to the meaty part of this, the goal of today. And I kind of want to hear from you guys. I know I'm doing this out of order, but at the end, I want to hear from you guys, what, if anything, you wanted to take away if those questions were answered, and if we can have some dialogue at the end, maybe, if it wasn't. But I heard from James Berkeley. He recommended that we really hone in on this part, especially for teachers, or even you guys as counselors that might be talking with teachers about some of the signs and symptoms they can look for, whether it be virtual or whenever we get back into the school building. So the next few slides have a lot of words on them. Not going to read it to you, but I am going to highlight certain things, like on this next slide, how a lot of these signs and symptoms of mental unwellness mirror a lot of things like a heart attack or a stroke. So in mental health first aid, when I'm teaching mental health first aid, we really highlight the fact that with your naked eye, you can't tell the difference between a heart attack and an anxiety attack. And the truth of the matter is, you shouldn't be able to. We should be teaching people that finding out about your mental wellness is just as important as going to your primary care physician to find out about your physical wellness. So a lot of people are shocked to learn that anxiety can manifest as aches and pains. And you might have a student that you go to check on and say, "Hey, Sally, why didn't you log on time?" And they say, "My stomach was just hurting too bad." Typically, we might think of that as defiant or an excuse, but if you're thinking of staying aware and establishing a baseline and the power of reframing, you might choose to think to yourself, let me store that in the back of my head and notice if Sally continuously has stomach aches, and if it's right after a weekend where she stayed with dad, or, like those sorts of things. Logging patterns, understanding that these signs and symptoms may very well be their mental health. This is just another slide. So change in hygiene, change in, how much they're eating. If you have a student that you worked with last year before March, and then when you do get to see them again in September, you notice, well, they've lost quite a bit of weight from March to September. It could be, they started working out over, the time since you last saw them in person, or it could be a warning sign. It's just your job to try and establish a baseline and then respond to it as needed. Same for emotional and behavioral signs and symptoms. The emphasis on this slide really is finding those extreme changes. So you'll see inability to manage responsibilities. We all are struggling right now to manage all the different things we have going on, but a complete inability to manage any of your responsibilities, or a complete oversensitivity to comments or criticism. That's much different than, a typical response that we would expect. So being able to kind of scale what you see and be mindful of those changes. And then thoughts, these are the harder things to assess, but if you're able to get some one-on-one conversations, you might have a better chance to pick up on these types of signs and symptoms or things to look for. Rigid thinking is a big one. I did a presentation a couple weeks ago, and a teacher asked, well, how can I really assess anxiety virtually? And the response was, we all like routine and predictability, that helps calm us. But if they are completely shutting down at the thought of doing something a little different, or they're like, really has to be in order or, precise, and they have no wiggle room for that, that could be a sign of anxiety, that rigidity. So being able to pick up on those sorts of things could really be good insight for you, even in a virtual platform. So the response part. So these next few slides are going to be an acronym that I admittedly borrowed from Mental Health First Aid, but it's very helpful. And it is the ALGE acronym. So up until this point, we've really been talking about the A, which is assessment. So every time you are trying to establish a baseline for your students, that is assessment. So that is the A. That is how you start to respond and intervene when you think somebody might need some help. So the L in ALGE is to listen non-judgmentally. So I can't emphasize the importance of this enough, but using I statements, and even us as counselors, we fall into this trap sometimes too, where we know, we can see what's happening, and we just want to help our clients or our students get to that end line quicker than they might be ready to. So we start to tell them instead of asking them, and giving them space with silence to respond and speak their truth, especially when it's a young person. So all of us are going through COVID. None of us have been 13, 14, 15 going through COVID. And just the social unrest, this political climate, regardless of what side you're on, it's stressful. And so none of us have had to live through that during our formative years. So understanding that their culture is so different than ours, they need empathy and they need you to be genuine. So using language that makes you as the adult comfortable, and not just trying to steal their words, like, trying to throw "it's lit" in there every 5 seconds and you're not even using it right. Like, they can pick up on that. They know what's natural for you and what's not. So yeah. The first G is giving reassurance and information, not advice. So saying something very specific like, hey, if you choose to get some help, I know some resources for you, is very different than you need to go talk to somebody. Completely different. The second one is more advice. The first one is just factual information. So, and also acknowledging your own limits. I know that as school counselors and as teachers, you wear 50 million hats at once. You might not be able to do what an outside community provider can do in terms of counseling or meeting a specific need. Or even as a teacher, you can understand that you didn't have formal mental health training. So acknowledging your limits is okay, and that's encouraged. You don't have to try and fix it all. You don't have to try and have a student or a family, a parent in front of you and solve all the problems. You just have to be knowledgeable and own up to that. Another chart that gives a good example. So again, if you choose to use this as a resource and share some of this information with somebody, sometimes it's really struggling. I really like the first one as an example about reassuring information. So if you have a teen going through a breakup, saying, hey, this can be tough and it's completely natural for you to feel like that, is very different than, I remember when I had my first heartbreak, I think this is what you should do. That really, for whatever reason, helps parents understand, and even other adults who've kind of got caught up in the expectations and the hustle and bustle of life, just really put that in perspective, the difference between giving information versus advice. And the last one, telling a young person you are not alone, is very different than you'll get over it. Like, just try not to think about it too much. We might have good intentions with saying that, but it's not very helpful. But telling somebody you're not alone could be helpful. The first E is to encourage professional help in the ALGE acronym. But I always make this disclaimer as somebody that works in the mental health field: professional help is not for everybody. You might have plenty of families or students that don't feel comfortable talking to a counselor or therapist, whatever language they use. And that's okay, because the second E is to encourage some self-help and other strategies. So helping them identify what other adults or people in their lives might be helpful. What other activities might they do that are therapeutic but not therapy in and of themselves? Including the family in this plan. Whatever else might be helpful for them in the moment is okay. And I think too, sometimes, you know, when you are a teacher and when you're working and you know you have all these other guidelines and deadlines to meet hanging over your head, like sometimes it's hard not to just say, hey, maybe you should go talk to, you know, Miss Carter. And maybe it's harder not to do that. It's harder to sit down and create a different strategy. But what I would remind you is sometimes you are the bridge as the teacher, and you're the safe place, and the counselor is not. So if you have this skill set just to do these simple things, you could be jump-starting somebody's journey to getting, you know, the help that they need. And really normalizing that therapy is okay, and also it's okay if you're not ready for that, but here are some things you can do until you are. So virtual platform tips. So I've tried to throughout talk about how you can relate all of this in the virtual world, but just some specifics, because we are all human and we're all stressed by these changes. Sometimes you just need to hear somebody else say, it's okay to trust your instincts. Like your gut feeling about something that's just not right still applies in this virtual world. You know, like you've been doing this for some time, and if you are in the helping field, you have a natural intuition that can just kind of tell you that maybe this needs some more digging, or maybe I do need to email this parent directly, or maybe I need to call home for this particular family because I just have that feeling that they need a little bit more attention. But also using the standard metrics that you know, so objective observation, paying attention to any changes in students' quality of work, their body language, their ability to focus, the change in a tone or speech pattern, all of that still applies. How they text in the chat on week 1 of school versus, okay, it's week 9 and now they are engaging very differently than they used to. All of that still applies. And number 3, being very intentional about how you reach out to help. So again, being direct, using I statements, using appropriate language, but also being intentional to admit when it's just too much and you're not able to intervene how you might want to, and I'm going to loop in somebody else. And number 4, communicate. What I would say too is, if you are a teacher and you are choosing to be the bridge, but you don't feel like an expert, it's okay to call up a mental health professional and get some tips before calling the family. Or it's okay to call a mental health professional right after and get some tips, and say, hey, I said this, was that okay? Or what do you think? And get some support that way. In a little bit, I will share a phone number for you that you can call, that can be a resource for that if you so choose. So this slide earlier on, I talked about how one of the number 1 ways to kind of combat adverse childhood experiences was to foster resilience. And a lot of people are like, well, how do I do that? I don't have a lot of time as a teacher or as a school counselor, school social worker, admin to really do that. So these are just 12 ways that you can incorporate in your daily language that can help encourage and build resilience with words. So saying things like, you're very brave, or, you know, is there a way I can help you without doing it for you? Or even my favorite, like, you've done this before, I know you can do it again. Like, you know, there are things that you've already overcome and accomplished. So let's try and do that with this thing too. Or just that encouragement, keep going, you're almost there. And I love the way you always try so hard. Like, these are ways to really build that spirit of resilience in youth without doing something, you know, a grand gesture, more of just a conversation. This can be helpful. And so what if you notice these warning signs within yourself? So this is the part where I really encourage you guys to use this as a resource once you get the PDF. So there's a little quiz here that you can take that really tells you where you fall for burnout. Being able to have that self-awareness and do that assessment will be crucial as we navigate kind of this pandemic and what's going on. But also learning the difference between burnout and compassion fatigue. So compassion fatigue is kind of like taking on some of those PTSD type symptoms or trauma responses that some of our students or clients might have, and then we start to have those same signs and symptoms too. So that increased anxiety, that inability to sleep, feeling like, you know, extra jumpy. So if you're noticing these things, these 4 steps are really helpful. So establishing your own baseline, having an accountability partner, somebody that knew you pre-COVID and can say, well, I remember what you were like at the end of, you know, 2018, or I remember what you were like at the middle of 2019 compared to now, so that you really have that objective view of where you were and where you are, and then start to notice your daily inner self-talk. Like, do you wake up like, oh my God, another day of this torture, I hate Zoom, I hate virtual meetings? Like, has your self-talk and inner thoughts become extra negative? And if so, do I have the ability to redirect that and start to do some better, more healthy practices? And if not, does that mean I need to go ahead and seek some help, whether it be professional help or some other type of therapeutic activity that makes sense for me? All of that applies to you guys. So we are coming to the end here. So this is the phone number I was telling you about earlier. That is the one point of entry to everything that we now offer at Western Tidewater. Whether you need to get to Karen and Smithfield, Isle of Wight, or you need to get to Suffolk, or you as a professional just need somebody to talk to you for 30 minutes, or you just need some tips, or you think you have a family that needs family therapy, you can call the same number. It's one number for everything. And we really did that on purpose because lots of confusion. We can figure that out internally where you need to go. All you need to do is call that line and say what you need, and we can make it happen. We also recognize that Western Tidewater might not be the best fit for everybody. So these are some national resources that can really help jumpstart your mental wellness journey. So if you didn't know, also 211 has a website now, and it's very helpful. You can go up there and you can type in almost anything that you need in your area, and they'll come up with some resources for you. So if families want to do that instead, they can. If you need to do that instead, you can. One of my favorite resources that I talk about, try and do a plug for every time I do a training, which is the trevorproject.org for those that identify with the LGBTQ plus population. They have a 24/7 hotline, text line, and then trevorspace.org. I haven't been up there recently to say if that is still active, but it's kind of like MySpace was back in the day, but now it's for, it's called Trevor Space, and it's for young people ages 13 and 24 that need an affirming community and a safe space to really talk about whatever they're going through. Some more links and resources that you will have access to. And then a little slide that talks about how you could learn more and how you can contact me. And I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to stop recording.